Well done on making it here. First of all, we gave you 2 different times, then we sent half of you to play a netball match, and then we stopped most of you getting in the building after 5 o'clock. So I think you deserve a prize for actually making it here. So, and welcome to any of our external visitors. Oh, one of them was there, but she's moved now. Where's Helen? Helen's here from Kids Company, which you might know about. She's an occupational therapist, and one of our grants is in collaboration with Kids Company, which is fantastic. And also, I think generally people are staff and students from the whole of our college, which is really nice. So we just thought, as we were on a bit of a roll with our grant awards this term, it was really nice to get together and hear just from each of the people who've put that enormous amount of effort into getting a grant, a little bit more about it, and also about the funders which they've got their grants from, because when we're all trying to get funding, hi Ken, have a seat. When we're all trying to get funding, it's always good to know a little bit more about the different funders and what kind of projects they fund. But also, when we're in contact with other colleagues outside the university or within the university, if we know a bit about each other's projects, we can help people to make links with each other and to share in other people's successes. So thanks very much for coming along. Now, originally I said people could have like 5 minutes with a select number of slides and then straight after have some questions. But I just wonder if it might be better if we go for back-to-back presentations and then some questions at the end so that we don't miss out on going out for our drinks, which, as you know, is quite an important aspect of the evening in my view. And also you'll notice in honour of our evening, they've started to put up the Christmas trees in the foyer, so I'm sure that'll be nice. So, okay, so just first of all, we've got, I think we've got 9 presentations, because as I started this idea, more and more people kept on getting grants, which was superb, and so the list has got longer and longer. So we're going to start off at the top, so hopefully you've all got a sheet there. And first of all, I think Christina's going to come up.
Yeah, I didn't think I was, but...
Aren't you? Or Mary Pat?
No, I know you have.
There's such as you can see, you have to be really top class, super organised, really impressive to win a grant.
No, it's when you're V for Victor, you're always last.
Oh well, I've switched the order. So
don't confuse me.
So Christina,
okay, I'll go first.
Who's queen of some of the ESRC grants, is going to tell us about the funding award which Mary and Christina have been given, which is to run a seminar series, to which I presume we're all invited.
Yeah.
On new perspectives on loneliness, developing theory, methodology and evidence for practice.
Okay, sorry for not clearly keeping up and for the paradigm shift. Perhaps in this case the order is K for Christina rather than V for Victor. So, okay, so this is a few minutes on an ESRC seminar series that I've been awarded in collaboration with Mary Pat, but also with an external person, Mike Thomas, who is a graduate of the MA in social work at Brunel, who then did his PhD as an on an ESRC studentship at Cardiff, very good choice of university, and is now working as a lecturer in Kent. So ours is a slightly different proposal because I'm sure most of you are aware of things that go through ESRC to ESRC have to be internally peer reviewed at university level as part of the demand management system. This means that we benefit from getting a very, very high level peer review, but it does mean that it adds an extra layer into the development process. So if you're putting anything into the research councils, you need to allow for that part of the process. So this is a seminar series which doesn't bring a lot of cash, but actually is a very high on the prestige indicator. And ESRC fund these, in essence, to bring groups of researchers together to think about particular topics with a view to potentially then empirical research applications coming from it. So, as most of you know, I have a long a long-standing interest in loneliness and isolation, and it's one of those topics that people become uninterested in and then more interested in a sort of cyclical fashion. So we happen to be fortunate, I think, in putting in this application when Public Health England and a few other people helpfully pointed out the negative consequences of loneliness. I have to say, as a researcher, I don't believe that evidence base for one moment, but it's really handy for getting research grants. So again, I think we were fortunate in having an academically interesting topic area which suddenly crept up the policy agenda. And what we wanted to do was to build on some of the current, and that's just a summary of some of the current evidence base, and try and extend it further as part of our seminar series. So I think we were fortunate in having topicality on our side. So what we've got funding for is a series of seminars. I think there are 7. We promised to deliver. We might do that, we might not. We'll see how it goes. That are going to be both interdisciplinary, international, and very important. 2 important criteria for us getting this award were, first of all, we had Mike Thomas involved, because ESRC like applicant teams that include people at a range of stages of their career, and that we have very strong links and good impact and dissemination strategy through my links with the campaign to end loneliness, and also with something called Silverline, which is like Childline for grannies, which is being set up by Esther Ranson. So I think that helped us as well, that strong engagement of users. The other thing that's very helpful that ESRC are looking for is not just that it's a good team, not just that it's a great idea, but that your host institution thinks it's a good idea, both by giving it internal peer review, but also coughing up some support. So as you'll see there, Brunel are going to fund a knowledge transfer fellowship at the end of it to work with our impact partners to maximise whatever the output may be. So for ESRC, that's a very strong, that's a very important part of what they're looking for in an application. If the university is not prepared to fund a studentship, several studentships, a lectureship or something, then it's not going to go anywhere. So we've got a range of different styles we're trying for our seminars, ranging from discussion groups to more traditional seminars. We will invite you all along, so you can all come and be fascinated. And then the idea is that we'll contribute to the evidence base around understanding of loneliness, both theoretically and methodologically. The idea to generate one of the important outputs being to generate a research network for a 2020 European research application. And so who's here? Is the Pro Vice Chancellor for Research not here? Okay, the chances of that happening are about 0, because I'm never going to run a European research project ever. But Mary Pat might.
This is being recorded.
Yes.
It is being recorded.
Okay, fair enough. I'm happy with that. Actually, he knows that, because I think European projects are a nightmare. There are just a couple of other small things that I might as well do a bit of shameless self-promotion about. There will be, starting at the bottom, I'm also a partner on a second ESRC seminar series on physical activity in later life, which is being led by Cassie Phoenix down at Exeter, and we will be holding a seminar on exercise and older people, and hopefully I'm going to get Tess Kay and Louise Mansfield in sports science to help me out with that. I don't know that I've asked them yet, so cut that bit until I've asked them. And I'm just, with Rachel's help, they're working on an evidence synthesis of the relationship between loneliness, isolation and dementia. Again, an interesting topic area where the press representations perhaps don't fully and accurately reflect the quality of the research. So that's my 5 minutes of fame.
That's 7 minutes, well done.
Okay.
So, large round of applause.
Large round of applause. And particularly appreciation for the cartoon.
Great, thank you, Christina. Excellent. So, if you ever want to go for one of these awards, Christina, I'm sure will hold you by the hand and help you learn the ropes. So, a few facts there on how to go around it, and we'll look forward to coming. So, second speaker, Debbie's going to come up, clad in a beautiful Pakistani. What's the special name?
I don't think it's a pashmina, it's just synthetic, but it is from Pakistan.
It's very beautiful, yes. Okay. So Debbie's going to be talking to us about her project awarded by the British Council entitled Developing Inclusive Education in Pakistan, a collaborative project between British and Pakistani occupational therapists and teachers. Thanks.
Thank you. I'm very pleased that our partners from Kids Company are with us today. Helen McLaughlin and Caroline McHugh are here, and they are the OTs who are going to be working on this project with us. So that's really, really nice. If you have questions for any of us later, I'm sure you'll be able to answer them. I have worked in Pakistan for quite a long time, 9 years total, both in OT, community-based rehabilitation, inclusive education, quite a lot of different roles. So this is working with people I have either had some contact with in terms of the OT school or worked with very closely, as in the case of the inclusive school. But first, let me tell you about the funding. I was quite keen on looking for an opportunity to do collaborative research with the occupational therapy school in Karachi for several reasons. One is because I have a passion for that country and knowing how few children with disabilities actually end up in any school at all. And the estimate is about 2%. And because I know that it is possible to increase inclusion and to get much better school cultures in the process. So I was looking for ways of doing this. I'm also an action researcher, and therefore not many funders like that kind of research. So it's quite difficult to figure out who you apply for. And when I wanted to go out on a preliminary visit last year, I didn't get funding from the COT travel funds to go. I didn't get funding through the RDF sort of preparatory monies administered through Brunel, but funded by ESRC. So I just went. I just got a ticket and went and stayed with my friends and, didn't spend too much money. But actually, by doing that, I then made sure that the occupational therapy colleagues there became enthusiastic to try and do something together. The university they're working for has been developing their research capacity, but has mainly focused on quantitative methods, and they're very keen to find somebody who will help them kickstart the more qualitative research approaches. Also, it led to us then setting up a memorandum of understanding between the universities. So that was already in place when it then applied with the British Council. I also applied with the Society for Research in Higher Education for a small fund as well, which I didn't get either. So finally, with the British Council, I was successful. And I think this was a perfect kind of funding stream for this project, because what it's trying to do is get at least one university in the UK and at least one in Pakistan in this case, they do it in other countries as well, to work together with a focus on knowledge transfer. So you have to have at least one non-university partner in Pakistan. And you can have more non-university partners, which is why we drew in Kids Company to draw on their expertise. So really, their purpose is to unlock and exchange the knowledge and expertise held by universities for the benefit of communities and economies. So in our case, it is a school system that we'll be working with, and more than one school system, as I'll tell you in a minute. But it could also have been an industry or a government organization, non-government organization. It could have been anything, not necessarily education. It's for 3 years. And we've got 20,000 a year, which does not cover any of the time involved, or the overheads. It only covers actual costs of traveling there, staying there, resources that we might need to buy or make, etc. So, as I said, we're bringing together the Occupational Therapy School at the Dow University for Health Sciences in Karachi. This is one of a school that has only existed for about 6 years, but there has been another school that is still running for about 40 years with very little progress. Occupational therapy is not actually doing very well in Pakistan, which is one of the reasons why I was looking for ways in to try and support them without saying, oh, you're not doing very well. So by offering a research collaboration, you're then actually saying, you know, we form a partnership, and the idea really is in the process to support not just a research capacity, but through that also their clinical reasoning and their whole professionalism. And a nice example of that is that with the ethics process that we're going through at the moment, we were asked about the code of ethics that they might be working to, but there isn't any, neither for the teaching profession nor for the OT profession in Pakistan. But both of them then said, well, actually, we need to be starting to look at this. So actually, they're now going to work on developing this within the profession. So actually, even before we started, there's already some professional development going on there. So that's really nice. So what we're going to do, is use action research to develop the role of occupational therapy in inclusive education. That's sort of the short objective of it all. So there's a whole team of occupational therapists in Dow University that's going to be involved, but 2 of them will have weekly visits in the first year to the partner school, the AMI school, and they will just spend that day alongside teachers in the classroom, planning together both around individual children with special needs, but also looking at classroom level, lesson planning, classroom activity development, etc. And then in the second year, during the first year, we'll be networking with other schools. The Pakistan Association for Inclusive Education, for example, which I founded, handy, has workshops which we will go along to and then find 2 more schools to work with. And that's really important because the AMI school is actually a private school which is for well-off children. But it is one of the very few schools that from its inception has chosen to be inclusive. That's one strength. Is very aware that they could be doing better and are very open to learning. Has got staff that is well educated and is very creative in their approach, so therefore has the capacity to support this with us. They are very willing to also work with others. So what we will do is in that first year, as we are working within the school, we're also going to look at identifying those other schools who then should be from different school systems, so the government system or an NGO system, and serving children from other socioeconomic incomes groups, lower socioeconomic income groups. And then that second year, 1 teacher from the AMI school with 1 OT will go into each of those schools. So 2 little teams will carry that. And it will continue in the AMI school with the rest of the team. What are we going to do? We're going to visit Pakistan twice a year, and the Pakistani team members will visit us once a year. So there will be some exposure to conference courses, but also some workshops where we will invite people, OTs and teachers interested in inclusion here, maybe particularly those working in ethnically diverse areas, to get some of that dissemination going on as we go along. Okay, let's better see what's on the next slide then, because I'm being told it's almost over. So really, I think I've said most of this. It's both to strengthen the OT profession and start looking at more up-to-date theories of occupational therapy and occupational science and how they could now then look at those and say, well, what might that mean for us in our context? But also, they are not really doing anything in inclusive education, apart from perhaps some children who are in an inclusive school might be coming for therapy sessions, but they're not looking at the concept of inclusion and how that might be supported in schools at the school level. So it's about research capacity, professional development, and getting them to work together, And also, very importantly, we will develop a resource guide from all the research activity that we do, so material development, activity development, etc., which then will hopefully be English, Urdu in the same volume, if you see what I mean. So it's widely accessible, and it will be available in print as well as CDs, so that they can implement it, and it will be disseminated through workshops and conferences in both countries. I think that was it.
Okay, I think I'll stop you there.
That's fine.
Thank you very much. That's really interesting. Great. Excellent. We're going to move on to Do This project, awarded by the Nuffield Foundation. So I think every single project we've got awarded is from a different funder, so quite useful to hear about all these different avenues. So this project's entitled Vulnerable Birth Mothers and Recurrent Care Proceedings, a Population Profiling Study, and it's in collaboration with Manchester University.
Right, hello everybody. I must be the first person here who needs to translate the title, because I can imagine that many people wonder what on earth do we mean by recurrent care proceedings. So before I go any further, let me just say that these are the mothers who keep coming back through a revolving door because they lose their children in care proceedings. The court makes a decision that the child needs to be removed. And then these mothers have another child and they come back to court. So they appear and reappear. So as you can see, this project is led by Manchester University and done in conjunction with both ourselves here at Brunel University and also with the Tavistock Portman Trust. Now, the Nuffield Foundation is a fantastic body to work with. I'd really recommend that anybody who is interested in research that covers education, social policy, should seriously think about applying to them. And what makes them special is that they are very responsive. You don't have to respond to a particular call. If you've got a good idea, you approach them and they ask for a 3-page outline, and on the basis of that, we'll both give you feedback as to whether it is promising, and also then give you some guidance on working up a full application. I've now had a number of grants with the Nuffield Foundation, particularly in relation to the Family Drug and Alcohol Court evaluation, but much earlier on also in work that I was doing in Russia. So they really are interested in a wide range of areas, and particularly in innovation. Their strongest streams are around children and families and law in society, and they're particularly interested in the interface between law, policy and practice and decision making. So anybody who wants to talk to me about them, delighted to warmly recommend them, and they have fantastic premises in the centre of London in Bedford Square, which is a bonus, and delicious food. So why the first project that they funded for us on this question of vulnerable mothers and recurrent care proceedings was chosen, I think, for 2 reasons. One, the topic was innovative. It's what I think research is really interesting. Sometimes the most obvious questions that everybody will tell you from practice they know are kind of key events in practice are just not researched. So one of the things that practitioners have said, lawyers, social workers, frequently is that they keep on seeing these same parents processing through the care proceedings courts, the family proceedings courts, but nobody had ever thought to look at it. So Nuffield was interested in that, and they funded us for a feasibility study which underpins the present study. Now, the second thing that they were interested in, and are increasingly interested in, is the use of large-scale administrative data sets and how you can use these large-scale data sets for research purposes. We'd actually applied for a full large-scale study, and Nuffield said no at the time. They said, we have no idea whether you'll actually be able to get sufficiently rich data from these large-scale administrative data sets, which are held by the court advisory. Oh, well, I'll come on to the next slide. Next slide. Let me come on to this one and work backwards. The CAFCAS database. That's how we did our first study, and they hold the national database on all care proceedings, all public and private law proceedings in the country relating to children. So it's a fantastic data source, and it hadn't been used in this way before. So let me come right back to the rationale, mindful of Scylla's eye. So that first study that they funded, which was a feasibility study, established the key things to lay the foundation for the study we're doing now. And what it simply showed was, A, you could use this administrative data set. There's over 46,000 mothers on it over the last 7 years for estimating a prevalence of all care proceedings, but particularly these recurrent ones. And it showed it was a big problem, 1 in 3, which has huge implications, financial, resources for local authorities, all sorts of implications. So that's why they have gone on to fund our present study. And the present study, essentially, over the next 2 years, is going to allow us to get a much more detailed understanding of the pattern of these recurrent care proceedings, why families come back again and again, and what can be done about it. And the interesting thing is it cuts across both children's services, their response, with reproductive health. So there's a very interesting intersection, as well as policy implications and practical implications for better service development. In it, we hope to be looking at fathers. Fathers are recurrent as well. They reappear before the courts, and we'll have a much more detailed understanding of the profiles of these families. So I've already very briefly mentioned that we will be using this database. I'm going to avoid looking at Scylla for a minute. 1 minute, fine. That's absolutely fine. And we're using it in 2 ways. The main database records really basic information about ages and things like that for the mothers. Interestingly, it doesn't allow you to collect any data on things like disability and ethnicity. It's not part of the national database. So what we're doing to supplement this very broad-based picture is looking at their electronic records, which capture all the reports that are put to court by both the CAFCAS guardians, by children's services, and by experts. And on that basis, we'll be able to build an in-depth study. We'll then interview parents, and their stories are going to be really important in telling us, we've already started that work, who manages to break the cycle and what sort of help do parents think they need. We'll then combine all the data together, identify large themes, and produce the usual stuff. But also we think that some of the findings around maternal recovery stories and being able to begin to look in children's services at the use of large-scale data sets is going to be a main contribution. In children's services, and this is my final point, most research has really, I think, struggled to go beyond having, say, 6 local authorities in terms of establishing whatever you want to research. So this is really opening up a whole new set of doors, which we think is very exciting.
Thank you very much. You may have heard Judith on the Today programme, because the work they've been doing about evaluating the family and alcohol courts of has been rolled out nationally, I believe, so that's fantastic. Great, Emma. Now, Emma has 2 achievements, because you'll know the other achievement if you've got an Athena Swan Award. It means you must have had a baby as well.
Well, a while ago now.
Yeah. So when you've had a time off for maternity leave, that means you're then eligible to come back. And paternity leave, or is it just maternity leave?
Paternity leave or extended carers leave too.
So any of those categories means that you're then eligible to apply for the Athena Swan Award, which the university has. So I know Stephanie Tempest got it as well from our school. So and applications are open now. So yeah, so there are a few people around who might find they're eligible for that particular one. So Emma's going to tell us about the award she's had, which is New Landscapes of Training for Work, the extended role of housing associations.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Emma. Right, hello everyone. As Scylla said, my research grant is an internally funded one from the Athena Swan Research Awards. And this is actually a very useful pot of money because it's up to £15,000. So if you are eligible, I would suggest that you do apply for it. And it's considered pump priming money. I think the idea is when you go off and have a baby, you get baby brain or something. But also it means that your kind of research career, if you like, has been stalled for a little while. So the expectation of the university, and also for me, is that this will be used to develop a wider research project on social housing and welfare to work. Most likely for the ESRC, but listening to Judith, I was thinking of Nuffield as well. So this started... Oh, okay. So the project started last month and it extends until February 2016, and I'm in the process at the moment of appointing a part-time researcher who will be starting on the project from January for 6 months. I also hope to be working with Catalyst Housing. This is a housing association based in Ealing, and it works across the West London area. And in particular, I'll be working with its community development arm, which is Catalyst Gateway. And they're responsible for running skills and training aimed at encouraging tenants back into paid employment. So in terms of background to this, the background is that the role and function of social housing in England have been and are being recast. So what can be seen as a sweeping programme of reform is being implemented at the moment by the government in response to what it sees as the failure of social housing to serve as an effective welfare service. And a perception in particular that social housing is promoting dependency rather than social mobility. So these are kind of big buzzwords at the moment. This links to various government policies, in particular the Treasury's plan for growth, and linked to that the DWP's welfare reforms and work programme. So very much the government's aim is about creating more educated and flexible workforce and making work pay, as we hear a lot of the time from the government. In terms of housing, this is important because a significant proportion of housing association tenants are unemployed. So data from St Andrews University suggests that only 29% of housing association tenants are in full-time or part-time paid employment. And so individual housing associations have been and are expected to engage with the work programme and to offer various training programmes to enable welfare to work. So the National Housing Federation suggested that 1,000 projects were run in 2010-11 to tackle worklessness, and this reached 200,000 people. But these numbers need to increase. So the broad objective of this study is to investigate this relationship between social housing, training and work. And explore how current policies on re-employment and retraining are being played out at the local level through housing associations. So the project will primarily focus on the experience of tenants in relation to the welfare to work agenda. So the project specifically will look at the aims, purposes and potential conflicts of housing association training programmes, the reasons and expectations tenants have for participating in them, The social and spatial processes, experience and implications of participation, and the impact participation has on perceptions of further training and or re-employment. And then in particular, the extent to which housing association training programmes act as a transformative space through which tenants negotiate and challenge a range of different identities and subject positions. So benefit claimant, tenant, learner, worker, citizen, and so on. So if you like, housing associations are positioning tenants in quite an interesting way. They are offering them housing, but the expectation is there that they will become a worker. They will move from claiming benefits, they're becoming an active learner, and also, of course, active citizen too. Excuse me. So in terms of project innovation, this was one of the, I suppose, key points of the application. The processes and experiences of training have been largely absent from appraisals of welfare to work in the UK and elsewhere. Training often gets forgotten about, and the emphasis is just on work and employment. So a geographical perspective, I hope, promises new understandings of welfare, but also the spatial reworkings of governance and neoliberalism in the housing sector. Empirically, of course, it's very current given the relentless kind of neoliberal welfare to work rhetoric we hear. And there's a very pervasive policy agenda that is actively encouraging training for work in the UK and upskilling for the global economy. And how this is coupled at the same time with the radical changes that are happening in the housing sector. And methodologically, this is obviously a very small-scale project, and it does focus on the voices of tenants who are seldom heard in research. So there is a lot of research on housing and social housing, but only very limited research on experiences and expectations of the tenants themselves. And generally, there's only quantitative and very limited case study policy-related research on tenants and their engagement in training. So the idea is that by focusing on this one case study, this will be built up for a wider ESRC proposal in the coming year. Okay, thank you.
Excellent. And the next presenter is Wendy. Yeah. So I think Wendy's just come back from Canada, where presumably you were linking up with your research collaborators. And Wendy's going to tell us about the project she's had funded by the Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council of Canada, Aging Communication Technologies, Experiencing a Digital World in Later Life.
Thank you, Solange. Okay, I've got a few little postcards if anyone wants to have them, just to say a little bit about the project. This is, as Scylla was saying, it's funded by the Social Science and Humanities Research Council of Canada, and it's called a partnership grant, which I'll talk a little bit about more. It's a new type of grant in Canada, and we don't tend to have exactly the equivalent here. So we're all kind of learning at the moment about what it involves and how it's going to be managed in many different ways. In terms of saying about getting involved in different research projects and how you develop different research ideas, I just thought it'd be worth saying that probably the reason I got involved in this partnership emerged from my ESRC project, Photographing Everyday Life, when one of the key findings was around digital connectivity, social and digital connectivity. So my interest is in daily life, it's using visual methods. And with people in mid to later life, one of the sort of themes that came through the project was that people were actively using different virtual and digital connectivities, such as, and they have a range of different type of ones here, for whether it's mobile phones, iPads, laptops. and they're actively engaging them into their life. So it's kind of like just seeing a progress in that sort of way. So what this partnership aims to do, it's being led by Professor, I should have put Kimberly Shawshack, I should think actually probably, at Concordia University in Montreal. And it's a very large partnership. I'm one of the co-applicants, as they're called, co-investigators they're called here. There's 12 universities from a range of different countries in the UK, Canada, America, Spain, Finland, Peru, Malaysia, Holland and Romania. So it's quite diverse. So there are 7 research interviews. Again, like Christina was saying, the importance of having community partners and people who you can liaise with around the, in terms of knowledge exchange. And one of the key outputs will be around knowledge exchange to different types of people. And a number of collaborators as well. And so, and as you can see there, there's a Twitter account and a website. I think there's a Facebook page as well. So what we hope to do is it aims to look at 2 key areas over the next 7 years, which is like the growth of the digital and the growth of ageing. And it's got the interdisciplinary aspect of it, is that we've got people who understand how networks, digital networks work and how people and telecommunication type of networks work, people who design games, people who are social gerontologists, people who are social scientists, people who are into media and communication, and through the interdisciplinarity of that, to look at these, address and redress these ideas around digital ageism and cultural exclusion. So we're looking at this, bringing these together, these different thinking, and over time there'll be a series of different outputs, and how that, in terms of how we work together and what we want to achieve. And the way a large grant like this has been managed as well, it was about how they put us into different different interests that we're working within teams within it, within interrelated research themes. So that within this, there's 3 interrelated research themes. The first one is agency and aging, collaborative creativity in the digital arts in later life. So it's people who are using participatory approaches, action research, working with communities, and looking and involving those type of areas and taking forward that aspect. The second one is around critical mediations, everyday life and cultures of ageing, which is looking about how people in mid to later life are experiencing different types of digital, the digital things, photography, film, television, gaming, and music. And there's a huge amount of people who are also working on music in this sort of way, and the role of music within people's lives. And the last one is much more around the network societies and the actual technologies and how these are networked, and how the actual structures, the structures of the digital networks, and people with designers, laptops, Skyping, and how they're being designed, and how these are being designed in relation to mid to later life. And that's probably all I've got to say, really. I don't know if I could say more, but is that okay?
Fantastic, yeah. Thank you. So another funder interested in action research, Debbie. Great. Oh, I've jumped on one previous. Here we go. Excellent. Okay, Melissa, superb shooter in the netball team, if I may say so. Being a great basketball player, they were quite surprised by your capacity. So here we go. Melissa's project, which is with Debbie Kramer-Roy, and I think again in conjunction with Kids Company, our great partners here. So a new needs-driven, evidence-based pathway for children with handwriting difficulties in schools across London. And that's funded by Brunel's University's London's Knowledge Transfer Grant. Sorry.
Thanks, Ella. I think I broke every single rule in the netball game. My background is in basketball, so yeah, and if I'm still red-faced, you know why. So just a little bit of information about myself. I'm a children's occupational therapist, that's my background, and I work with children who have difficulties acquiring motor skills. Now, one of the skills in occupational therapy that we receive a tremendous amount of referrals for is handwriting, and 90% of school-age children will be referred to us for handwriting. So it's a skill that we need to know a lot about in order to implement evidence-based practice. But handwriting is a very different type of motor skill. We think about it now that it's redundant, we just use keyboarding skills. But actually, in education, there's only 2 countries in the world that use typing as the main form of education. Every other country in the world uses handwriting, so it's something children need to learn. But the interesting thing about it is that the amount of words a child can produce in a minute will predict the length of their writing, the length of the text, and the quality of that text. So it ties in very closely to what the children have to achieve at SATs in year 6 for English. So it makes it a very important skill for us, but it was a great opportunity came up with Kids Company in London, who their occupational therapy team is about 5 years old, and they've grown to about 12 therapists now. And they receive a lot of referrals for handwriting difficulties. But back in January, they were very interested in doing research, but not entirely sure what to research. So I met with them, and one of their things in schools was that schools wanted them to, make a difference in terms of academic achievement, and the therapy team were really keen to show that. And I said, well, let's look at handwriting, because it's something we need to research in occupational therapy anyway, and it's very relevant to your service. So we collaborated for the last 7 months, and we put in place an assessment protocol. So every child that they see, they do a certain amount of assessments that are embedded in the literature. They have lots of students go on placements there, so the students come out with a really good understanding of how to assess handwriting. So what we did was we seen a really good opportunity to actually put something formal in place with this nice collaboration. And the Knowledge Transfer Secondment Scheme at Brunel aims to do just that. So the university aims to maximise the impact of our knowledge, expertise and resources for the wider benefit of society. And it recognises the importance of knowledge transfer between the academic base, which is here, and the community. So the Knowledge Transfer Secondment Scheme will take higher level professionals, such as the therapists at KidsCo, and invite them to come and work with the academics here. So that's a little bit about the grant. So we went for that, and we put in an application to take it beyond the level of assessment and to actually do something with the kids in terms of intervention and create a pathway from assessment right the way through to intervention from children aged 3 all the way to 18 plus. Now they work with young adults who haven't acquired a very good literacy skills, so this could be implemented with adults as old as 25. So what the funding will do will be to train the OTs first and foremost and give us the resources to purchase some of the evidence-based assessments that we need. So we need assessments with UK norms, and we'll look at things that are robust measures. But in terms of intervention, what we'll do is we'll develop a fine motor program from kids between 3 to 5 years of age. Now they work in up to 40 schools, and I think at the minute they're targeting 12 to 15. So we would look to implement a fine motors early pre-writing skills group for kids who are quite young. But then from 7 years of age up to 18 plus, we'll then develop intervention workbooks that are age appropriate, but very much embedded in the literature. So we know that motor learning approaches work in kids when acquiring motor skills, but they're not necessarily always in a usable way in therapy. So we're collaborating together to make the workbooks fun and something that will tap into what these kids find meaningful, and the therapists are experts in that. And I'll consult with them to try and embed the theory about what works when actually we're trying to learn a motor skill. This will create master dissertation topics for our OT pre-reg students. And at the minute we've got 2. One of them is looking at handwriting speed and whether that predicts writing quality in the kids that they work with. The other student is looking at the appropriateness of referrals. So do Senkos and teachers make appropriate referrals? We know that teachers don't get training on handwriting anymore, so they're not great sometimes at picking up handwriting difficulties. So we look at that in terms of a master's dissertation. And that's all novel, original stuff that's never been written about in occupational therapy. But finally, and the big thing that we'll do, is to look at transferring the knowledge to the parents and the teachers. So around a child, there's a therapist, the parent, and the teachers. We have to all work together, but we don't always work in an effective way. So what we'll do is, with this funding, is to fund twilight events in 15 schools, targeting teachers and parents. And we'll talk about handwriting and what Kids Company are doing with handwriting, just to build some more support around the child. I'm really happy to have Debbie Kramer-Roy on board, which is great because Debbie's expertise is in action research. So what we wanted to do is to try and take this model a little bit further and develop an occupational therapy model of practice for working with handwriting in schools. So trying to record the development of this pathway with the hope that we could possibly roll it out nationally if we got lots of evidence from the data that we gather to suggest that it's efficacious and it's something that we should consider. And more or less, that's it, but really glad to have Kids Company on board, and yeah, thanks very much.
Thank you. Right, our next project, Mariel. Yeah, you're looking cooler, cooled down a little bit after the... We were both trying to protect the goals going in. So between us, we managed to stop a few of them. But goal defence and goal attack, or were we the other way around? You were goalkeeper and I was goal defence. Yes, that was us. Okay. And now Mariel is going to tell us about a project, a pilot randomised controlled trial entitled Retrain, Community-Based Rehabilitation Training After Stroke. And this is in collaboration with Exeter University and Leeds, and it's awarded by the Stroke Association.
I have to say, I'm taking a big risk because I've got an animated slide coming next, and the golden rule of things is never put an animated slide when you're not in control. So the next thing might go horribly wrong. The other thing is that I, like Melissa, was prize fouler in that game, so I'm beginning to wonder if actually the number of fouls correlates with you getting a grant. We'll have to see that. So here we go. Is it going to work? Oh, it's going to work. Okay, so I'm going to talk about this study that we've just had funded, which is community-based rehabilitation training, which from now on I'll call Retrain, after stroke. And it's a pilot randomised controlled trial, and it says Leeds, Exeter University down there, and I have to say that the guys down at Exeter have been the lead here, Sarah Dean mainly, but a whole troop of people that I haven't written up, and also Leeds. And the involvement of Leeds is very interesting because the involvement of Leeds is because there's a big name professor up there. So despite all the expertise being in Exeter and here in London, actually the big name professor had to go on the grant as well. So there's a little note of caution. The pictures there are of Arnie training. You will hear in a minute the link between Retrain and Arnie. We're going to make that connection in a minute. But in fact, this is a story about the tortoise, because if nothing else, this is a story of how you have to be incredibly patient when you're doing or wanting to do a grant for a big RCT. What you're next going to hear with Jen is about the hare, but for most of us, I think the story is about a tortoise, and that's what I'm going to introduce. So the case for this study, well, we have a number of bits of evidence that defend this. Partly, there's quite a lot of evidence that talks about this period of transition when you've had your rehabilitation after stroke, and then it kind of stops. And you've got the rest of your life to live with a stroke, and you're stuck in limbo. There's no rehabilitation there, but there's also no community services there that really support you. And this idea of being stuck in limbo is something we hear again and again and again with the people who have had a stroke and gone through the system. There's also quite a lot of evidence now. The King's Group did quite a big study that talked about the unmet needs of people in the longer life after stroke. And there's a huge number of them, but kind of rehabilitation and that sense that actually we're not at plateau. We just can't move forward because we haven't got the services we need to move forward was something they were saying, and that the needs that they had for extending their rehabilitation weren't there. However, there's also a problem with the evidence on this, because while there are a few studies, and I say few, looking at stroke after 6 months, they're really small and the quality of them is very poor. So we don't know very much about actually how good rehabilitation at this longer time is. So on one side, we know that there's a need. We know there's not an awful lot of studies there. On the other side, there are actually increasing number of services that are trying to deliver on this. So we have exercise prescription schemes, we have walking the dog schemes, we have numerous things that have either got very small pause studies or in fact they're just rolling out. Now one of those is a exercise task specific, which I'll talk about in a minute, called ARNI. And basically ARNI has blossomed in this space that is required but doesn't have any underpinning research kind of about whether or not it really works. But it's there. It's happening in the community. It's, it's going. Now, the Stroke Association kind of does what it says in its name, is that it looks at research as well as support and other things for people who've had a stroke. They're very fond of quantitative studies. They are less fond of qualitative studies, so they very much like intervention studies. And really their tagline here is that they want to find new or improve existing treatments for those people who have a stroke. And this really fit that part of the remit, is this idea that these treatments that are going on out in the community later on and to explore that and see whether or not they're really doing what they should be doing or what they say they're doing. So what am I talking about with Arnie and Retrain? Arnie is my husband. He is actually my husband, but he has an E on the end, so it's just interesting for me that I now work on a project with his name. But it stands for Action for Rehabilitation for Neurological Injury. It's a very, very interesting kind of, what can I describe it? It's an organisation, it's an institute, it's a man called Tom. It's a process, it's an idea. And basically what's happened here is someone who's had a stroke has devised this plan, how to approach longer-term rehabilitation in stroke that's based on evidence, but it's also based on his own experience of having had a stroke and being stuck in limbo and wanting to carry on. And it really draws together a number of themes, partly task-related functional movement training, and the function and task is really core to the heart of it, but also physical coping strategies in terms of what do you do when you're out and about and somebody bashes you on the tube? How do you manage that when in fact you may have a balance impairment or something like that? There's also things about resistance training. Oh, I can't have you disappearing. Okay. All right, keep looking at the small screens. So also resistance training with the increasing evidence that actually you just need to have strong muscles as well to be able to function. And in that, some self-management ideas. So it's taken a lot of the research that we do know and packaged it together and interpreted it with this idea of a stroke survivor actually interpreting it. Now, Arnie is out there. It's being delivered in groups. It's being delivered in individuals. And how it's being delivered really varies on who's delivering it. And it's delivered by exercise professionals who have been specifically trained. Now, what Retrain is it's kind of a packaged up Arnie. It's tried to pull together all of those bits to be able to describe it. Because one of the issues with Arnie is that what Arnie's going on over here and the Arnie over here and the Arnie over here and the Arnie over here are different. And it's very difficult for us to actually work out if it's working when they're all so different. So Retrain has kind of packaged Arnie in a way that we can keep it tight and measure it. We've also pulled in a little bit more other evidence to try and really pack it into what we think is the best scheme we can. Just as a note here, we have used the Medical Research Council's framework for developing and evaluating complex interventions to guide, which goes through these four, you can't see it on the big screen, but it goes through these four box cycles: development, feasibility, piloting, evaluation, and finally implementation. What I've circled in red there, in terms of development and half of the feasibility, has taken us 5 years. And that's where I mean we are the tortoise. It's taken us 5 years to get to the point to get funding for a feasibility, acceptability, and effectiveness of procedures trial. This is not even telling us whether or not this intervention really works. What this study is going to tell us is, can we do a full-blown RCT? And if we can, how are we going to do it? How many people we need? What processes we need to actually deliver it? So we are nowhere near the end point. Just as a note on that, we have funding from a stroke association, but this has previously been submitted to a HTA and an RFPB and not been successful. So, you know, this is a lot of work. And in that process of the development, there's been about 8, 9, 10 studies, of which Amir and Cherry have been very involved in, and Exeter and Brunel have been working together to build up this development profile. But that's a long time. So here comes the tortoise again. And hopefully, eventually, the tortoise will get to the end line eventually, and we may get an answer to whether or not Arnie, or retrain as this manualised version of Arnie, works. What are we doing? Well, this is a single-blinded RCT with an N of 48. This is small. This is expensive and it's small. And in it, the intervention will be retrained, so they will be randomised, there will be a control group, and it will be very robustly, and it is very robustly kind of mapped out. There are several assessments with it, which are primarily looking at whether or not we've got the right outcome measures, mostly about mobility and kind of function with that. But actually this idea of checking the feasibility and acceptability, do the people who get the training like it? Is our control group appropriately a control group? Can we deliver it in the way that we want to? Do the instructors actually deliver retrain? Are they overwhelmed with the amount of training? All of these questions are the questions that we're going to be asking. So actually, while there's lots of outcome measures, there's also lots of process evaluation. So lots of interviews, lots of videoing, checking the content, and that's where we're going with it. And that's basically what it is. This is going to take another 2.5 years. We may, in 10 years, do an RCT, but not yet.
Okay, so I think it's just interesting, isn't it, how a number of people have tried several times with the same bid to get the money. I know my very first external grant, I tried about 4 funding streams. College of OT wouldn't touch it with the barge pole. And once I started to get little grants, then I found other funders took me back on again. So some of them, like you having track records, all these kinds of things. And sometimes it's a really good idea. It's just not quite the right funding body at that point in time. And so, you know, a lot of people put a lot of time into thinking up their projects. I know our master's students here are starting to probably plan their projects, and it isn't easy coming up with the idea and putting in the time and the effort. And I think a lot of us appreciate how much work goes into behind the scenes before you ever get the award. And then when you get the award, that's when Mary will tell us, right, now the real work starts. And actually you have to run the project, but it's all worthwhile. I think also just to say, I know we've got one more to present, so I won't take very long, but it's also interesting how you communicate the project you're doing. And we've got a strategy we had as a school, which included things like trying to publish laypersons' publications in the newspapers, in the local news, in charitable magazines, those types of things. Also, do try and get a web link on your website. You can go and record a podcast. We've done that for some of our projects about what it's about. You could always use the section from here tonight and add that onto your website. And get these kinds of cards done. And on some of our, cards when we're out at conferences and things, if you're in one of the institutes, the institutes, I believe, will make your card for you. Or if you have a grant, perhaps check with your heads of department, because perhaps we can get you your cards, and put your web link on the back to your research projects, so that when you're at conferences, you can keep disseminating the projects you're doing, because it's very nice to see things like this, which help to disseminate your work. So last but not least, we have Jen, Cherry, Bill and Tom. And I think Jen's going to come forward as the PI of this project. So now she didn't really know whether she wanted us to announce it, because she's had the phone call, which was very exciting to say you got the award, but not the letter. But I'm sure we haven't jinxed it. It's in the post.
Hopefully.
Yeah, so I'm sure that's excellent news. So this is Jen's first grant, and this is 1 year after her PhD, and it's several $100,000, so very many congratulations. And this is a project entitled An Evaluation of the Feasibility, Acceptability and Efficacy of Resistance Training in Adolescents with Cerebral Palsy. And I think some of your research team are here. Bill, I can recognise, yeah, and Cherry's here as well. So, and Tom's looking after his 3-week-old baby. Yes. So, yeah, thanks.
So, as Scylla said, we only found out a few days ago that we'd received funding for this project, so I'm going to keep this very brief.
Stand by the microphone.
So the study is, or the project is an investigation of resistance training among adolescents with cerebral palsy. You can see that we've got quite a big team on this. So there's researchers from the Department of Clinical Sciences and from Life Sciences. We also have a clinical scientist from Guy's and Tommy's and a paediatric physio from the Royal Surrey NHS Trust. And I think a particular strength of this application was the team. By having so many members on it, each person brought their specific expertise, but we all had a common interest in CP. So I think it was something that the funder liked about the project. So we've received funding for 3 years from Action Medical Research, which is a charity that offers funding for research that aims to reduce disability and prevent disease in children. So they offer project grants of up to £200,000 twice a year. So they're quite a nice funder, but they're not that widely known. And I was very lucky at the time that I was coming up with this project idea. Thanks to Mariel, Mariel spotted it, I didn't spot it. Action Medical Research were offering a joint award with the Chartered Society of Physiotherapy. So the Chartered Society of Physiotherapy Charitable Trust was offering up an additional £50,000 for any project that involved children with CP. So the project, very briefly, it's a randomised controlled trial of resistance training among adolescents with CP. Resistance training is commonly used as a physio intervention. And one of the things that we're interested in is it feasible to do an evidence-based resistance training program, and do adolescents comply with the program? And if they don't comply, what are the factors that prevent their compliance with the program? And also the factors that prevent physios from delivering evidence-based resistance training. The crux of the project lies around the increased energy cost of walking associated with CP. So my primary area of interest is physical activity amongst adolescents and children and adults with CP, and the health consequences of reduced physical activity. At the time that this project started, I was very interested in how the increased energy cost of walking associated with CP might result in reduced physical activity. And while I was thinking about this, Tom Corf gave me a proposal that he'd written, which was he was interested in looking at the biomechanical factors that are associated with the energy cost of walking amongst children. So this project was a combination of these two ideas. And after a number of iterations, we finally came up with the aims to evaluate the effectiveness of resistance training at reducing the energy cost of walking in adolescents with CP. And as a result of this, does physical activity and participation increase? And one of the really novel parts of this project is that we're also looking at the biomechanical and the neural adaptations that occur as a result of resistance training, and how these feed into a reduced cost, energy cost of walking. And that's about it. So we're hoping to start the project in the new year. Thanks.
Thank you, everyone. Sue Jobling's not here, is she? Never mind. Now, have we got any roving mics or not? Because we could just... the man's pointing. So thank you very much, man in the room. Oh, and they're on. Okay. Should we just take like 3 questions, and then we'll adjourn and we can carry on with our questions? Would anyone like to ask any of our presenters a question? I shall roam, or rove.
Can I ask Melissa? Why do children have trouble writing? What's the cause?
I think that's the question.
No, I don't know. Why?
You mean handwriting?
Yeah.
Okay. So it's really, really interesting because in occupational therapy practice, we will see very similar types of handwriting between kids. So if I had a kid with developmental coordination disorder, another one with autism, another one with ADHD, specific language impairment, their handwriting tends to look the same. So it could be illegible, very big, and not very fast. But actually, one of the things that I did in my PhD, which hasn't been done before in the English language, was to look at the kinematics of handwriting. So what we'll see is that kids pause in handwriting, very, very small, subtle pauses. You, when your handwriting is automatic, you'll program spelling and the movement before you write a word, and then you'll just write it, you won't stop. Kids who have underlying disorders will stop within words because it's not automatic. Kids with dyslexia will stop within misspelled words. Kids with PCD will stop because they'll form an A, realise that they formed it incorrectly, and go back and try and form it again, so the motor learning is broken down there. Kids with ADHD, we're not quite sure yet why, but it seems like the handwriting process, what's actually happening when the pen is moving, is the mechanism rather than, so it's very interesting that different disorders cause it in very different ways, but in a clinical setting it will look very similar.
Superb answer. Any more questions? Any of our researchers? We all just want the drink. Oh, it's better.
Thank you, sir. First of all, congratulations to all our colleagues. That's amazing that you got your grants, and it's really interesting to see your work. This is a question for Debbie, Mariel, and anyone else who's just got their first big grant. I suppose, Jen. So you tried and you tried again, but what was the main learning point about finding the right funder and being successful when you get your grant? Would be useful as a learning point for the rest of us. That would be great.
I think one very important thing is if you know what you're good at and what your passion is, and you want to pursue it. And you need to be really consistent and not think that if somebody doesn't want to fund it, that it's not valid. So I think you have to be sort of resilient and say, well, actually, I know that this will work, and I know that if only somebody will give me the money, I will prove them wrong or right or whatever. So I think that's a really important thing. And then, of course, the most important thing is to figure out who is actually offering funding at the time, and to look quite carefully as to would that match. And sometimes you're misinformed. Like, for example, I was advised by some colleagues through the RSCO that I should apply for the RDF, Research Development Fund, which is ESSP money held by Brunel, and when I put it in, it's not appropriate. So you put all the work in, and actually they should really have known that was not appropriate. If they advise you to go that way, then you do, don't you? So I think that is important to try and be a bit critical of somebody. So try that, to look more closely, is that actually the appropriate way? So finding the match between the funder and your project.
And certainly you're going to get more rejections than acceptances. You just have to kind of think, oh well, never mind, have another go, and try and put it behind you. Because it's the same as publishing papers, isn't it? But it's always worth trying, and then the joy is all the greater because of all the effort behind it at the end of the day. Is there anyone else who can comment on that?
I think it's that team for us. I mean, that 5 years is 5 years of working in a team here, and then a team with Exeter, wider, and in fact, sometimes just stepping in a slightly different role. I mean, I find it quite funny that I'm presenting about a pilot RCT because I am, in my heart, a qualitative researcher, but actually I'm using my qualitative skills because I'm doing this the process evaluation, and a lot of that's the qualitative part. So I'm using my skills, but within and adding those to a team who've got their own set of skills, and I'm just coming in with that. So it's about not necessarily kind of going, I'm only going to do that project, but actually going that I've got a part to play in that project with that team, and being really, 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 really patient, which is not one of my traits at all. Yeah.
Does anyone want to say anything about our peer review process? I think people review it with a mixed
it's blessing, but actually that's what's helped us raise our game enormously. And the quality of and the calibre of some of our peer review is often what's raised the bids. And although it can be a bit tough when some of them come in, come back and say, actually, it's not really, can't really put this forward. I just think the rest of the time it can be the reason we get bids. So
thanks for all of you who was on this presentation. My colleague, we are confounded, the very first time we really kind of pick up to the auditorium like this. The question is this, for the like of us students who are coming up and having to be interested in research, how do we go about it? We need to get a PhD and then move on forward from that. Thank you.
Anyone else? So how do you start off on your career pathway for developing your research career? Catherine?
Lots of people do it, so it is possible. So how you do it? If you've done a master's degree in your dissertation, you can publish that dissertation along with your supervisor. And if they won't help you, then you can maybe find somebody else who's interested in that area. If you look through the postgraduate prospectus at the university, you'll find which academics are interested in which academic areas. So you can find out who's working in the sort of areas you're interested in. And then, if you are interested in going further than publishing your master's degree and want to do a PhD, then that's another thing that you can start off doing. A lot of people do part-time PhDs, so if you can't afford to do a full-time PhD, you can get a job at the university and as a research associate or something like that, and then do your PhD alongside doing your work. So, for instance, people like me, I did my PhD part-time when I was working. And I deliberately took a 4-day-a-week job, so I had 1 day a week left over to actually do the PhD. And then, hopefully, once you've got through your PhD, you'll make links with other researchers, and you can start thinking about putting in bids. Sometimes the first bid you put in is a very, very small one for 10,000, something like that. And gradually work your way up to bigger bids and so on and so forth. Does that help?
Bill's got a bit of advice to you?
Say goodbye to your drinks then. Are you an MSc or a PhD student? Sorry, okay. In my experience, I think to be successful in this area, you need to really listen to your heart and your soul and find an area that you're really interested in and dedicate yourself to that area. As Catherine said, find the best people that do work in that area and somehow start collaborating with those. The main thing is just make sure, people say, you can't be passionate in research, but you need to have a passion about what you're doing and dedicate and make sure that you follow everything that's happening in that area. You know the latest developments, and you keep abreast with all the innovation that is in that area, and try and solve the biggest problems that exist in that area. You need to know what the big problems are in that area, and you need to sort of have the tools to be able to address those problems. That's what we keep saying in our seminars. And to do that, you can't do it alone. You need good people around you. You need to work in teams, as Brunel said. It's so complex these days that you need to look at so many aspects of the problem. Just make sure that you come up with ideas that perhaps other people cannot offer. There was something else, but I think I forgot now. So during the drinks, I'll discuss it.
Thank you very much, Phil. I think that's a really nice note to finish on. So, I mean, a lot of us are here because we enjoy it and also
we're happy to stay after the hours. And a lot of doing the research is certainly a vocational part of what we do. But luckily at Brunel, it's really, really valued, and doing research is seen as part of our core business. But those people who put in time on research know it always does go a bit above and beyond because it doesn't fit into a 9-to-5 kind of job. But on that note, I think I kind of feel ever so proud of everyone getting their grants, even though it's not really for me to be proud of you exactly, but I am, and I love telling people about the kinds of things you're achieving. So that's why I wanted to start having these types of events. And I'm sure when we get another group of people with their grants that we could come together and celebrate their achievements and hear about them. And to keep supporting those people who are trying to put in grants or work up their proposals in their masters or in their PhDs and help them to achieve the research which actually at the end of the day makes a difference to the lives of children with cerebral palsy, to elderly people who are lonely, to people who've had a stroke. And that's actually why we do the research in the first place. So thanks very much. So do come and have a drink, and let's see how the Christmas trees are going. Thank you very much.